So yes, without wasting too much time, I heard today, I read a study which said the effect of 1 cup of coffee, the caffeine it has in it, lasts for about 2 hours and 13 minutes. I guess 1 hour and 15 has been gone after the refreshment break, so I won't keep you occupied for more than 58 minutes, that's a promise. Also, the more interesting stuff, I have some giveaways here. So I encourage you guys to ask intelligent questions like you always do. And I'm going to pose some questions. Hopefully you guys answer them. And there's some giveaways here for good answers like you always give. Also, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to have one of the volunteers pass around a box in which you can drop your business card, or if you don't have a business card, just your contact information with email address. And at the end of my talk, I'm going to do a raffle. And if you need incentive, there's an iPod for the winner of that raffle. So hopefully that gets you guys charged up more than my talk. I know it will. I guess what I'm going to talk about is been responding to a lot of incidents in the recent past, and I'm just going to share what I found from those incidents, and hopefully you guys leave here slightly more enlightened on the incident response side and what trends are in real-world attacks. In early 2004, I came across a study by CERT. It was an empirical study which just showed this graph to me. Basically said that when I looked at this graph, I said, there's something for us to be worried about. If you look at that graph, there's a changing trend for sure in the year 2003 there. Right until 2002, what you see is the number of reported incidents, the ones reported to the CERT Coordination Center in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, are actually quite in sync with the number of vulnerabilities being issued by vendors. Kind of made sense. Someone issued a vulnerability. 2 months later, you had exploits going amok. You had worms exploiting that vulnerability. So incidents following vulnerabilities made sense. All of a sudden, in 2003, you saw that trend breaking. There's a sharp rise in the number of actual incidents or attacks as compared to the number of vendor-issued vulnerabilities. That's pretty worrisome. Anyone want to take a guess as to what the potential reasons for that could be? I told you there's some giveaways here, so... I beg your pardon? More Well, I guess that's a pretty innovative answer there by Dave, so I'm going to give him something for that innovative answer. Here you go. Okay, hopefully you get this right. Got it. No. More IDS sales, huh? Any other reasons you guys can think of? Innovative answers like that will get another stress ball. Ah, that's a great answer. Well, for that one, what I'm going to have to give you is a very unique t-shirt. So, the reason I say this t-shirt is unique, because it's a frequent flyer t-shirt. No kidding, no kidding. It was manufactured in a country right next to yours, in Thailand. It was imported into the United States, so it flew 10,000 miles, half across the globe. And then I bought it there, and I flew it back 10,000 miles. So it's a frequent flyer t-shirt. I'm gonna leave it here, you can pick it up, novelty. Any other reasons? So what Nish said there was 0-day attacks. What he meant by that is attacks are exploiting vulnerabilities before vendors knew about them or before vendors actually issued advisories for them. So obviously that's going to break the correlation between someone actually coming out and they're saying, hey, there's a vulnerability in blah, blah, blah service, in blah, blah, blah operating system manufactured in Redmond. So 0-day attacks definitely contributed to that sharp rise. Anything else anyone can think of? Come on, guys. You guys, I know the caffeine should still be working. Yes. Automated attacks, absolutely. That kind of ties back to what Dave was talking about. Self-propagating worms is definitely on the rise, and we've been seeing that a lot of incidents. For example, going back to what he said, and I'll give you your giveaway for that. I won't forget that one. In February of this year, I was responding to an incident where the client was actually hacked by an attack that exploited the BrightStore ArcServe backup service buffer overflow. What was interesting was the vulnerability was released on a certain day. I believe it was the 19th of February of this year, and I was actually at the client side responding to a worm exploiting that vulnerability on the 21st of February. Believe it or not, 2 days later, there was a worm running amok at a web hosting provider in the United States. And actually, I was pretty grateful that it was a known vulnerability. We've been responding to incidents where, like Nish brought up the issue, there's 0-day attacks, so you don't even know what you're going up against when you're in there. Whoa, yeah, I'm bad at it, sorry. So I guess moving ahead, I got some good answers there. The reason for that sharp rise, 0-day attack, IDS sales, and also self-propagating worms. I have a couple of other reasons which I thought about. Complete different genre of attacks, in rise in end-user attacks. Till about 2002, 2003, we really didn't see attackers going after end users. What you saw was they wanted to target servers, go after the servers, bring the servers down, or compromise customer databases. Now attackers are actually going after end users, and I'm going to actually talk through a couple of case studies which I've responded to in the real world, which have actually been attacks against end users. Also, like I said, like he brought up the point, easier to write exploits and worms, so that window between which a vulnerability is released and it's exploited is shrinking. It's kind of become negative most of the time these days. So what you come across is a lot of unpatched systems for those vulnerabilities. And obviously, not to forget, attacks against custom web applications, they don't really rely on any vendor-issued vulnerabilities. They're SQL injection attacks, cross-site scripting attacks that go against custom web applications. But like I said, through this talk, I'm going to focus on incidents that I responded to targeting end users. So just to repeat why we're here is because attackers are changing the way they operate, and end users are at higher risk, and it's become a finger-pointing game at this point. For example, users of banking applications are these attacks from hitting us. So case number one that I'm going to go through is a pretty sad story of a woman who lost a lot of money. In May of 2004, we were actually contracted by a district attorney in the United States to support the case of a woman who had lost, in 3 different transactions, $50,000 transferred potentially out of her online banking account. It started off with $20,000 gone. She notified the bank of those funds being gone. Guess what the bank did? The bank said, hey, we need to change your credentials. Seems like someone got a hold of your credentials. Next day, another $20,000 gone. That's after her credentials had been changed. At this point, she filed a civil complaint against the bank and said, I've lost $40,000. I need the bank to pay me back. Well, that was not going to happen, but instead what was going to happen was the bank was going to spend $150,000 on scrubbing the network to prove that they were clean. And in the meantime, that poor lady lost another $10,000. So $50,000 were gone in 3 days from that lady's online banking account. Obviously, the bank came out clean saying it's not really us, so how could on the end user's PC? So my prime suspect there was on scrubbing the network to prove that they were clean. And in the meantime, that poor lady lost another $10,000. So $50,000 were gone in 3 days from that lady's online banking account. Obviously, the bank came out clean saying it's not really us. So how could the victim lose her credentials? Obviously, we thought that it was an end user attack, and we requested that we perform a forensics analysis on the end user's PC. So my prime suspect there was the web browser, Internet Explorer. I beg your pardon, Explorer. At this time in 2004, when this incident occurred, it had over 190 vulnerabilities that could be remotely exploited to gain privileged access. So obviously it was the prime suspect of this attack, and this lady did use this particular browser. Also, given the fact that the source code leaked out for Windows, I suspect there's a lot of zero-day issues out there which a lot of people don't even know about. So, as usual, what you can see there is the actual photograph of this woman's PC. and just haven't put it up there for fun. The reason it's up there is because what we normally do as a part of standard forensic procedure is write details about serial numbers, hard drive type, etc. on a piece of paper like you see there, and actually photograph it. So in case we're dealing with an incident that's affected over 100 machines, we know at least from the photograph which machine was what. I work with a bunch of guys who suffer from amnesia, so we need to do that. Here's just a little bit from our standard forensics procedures which have changed in the recent past, and actually point number 2 there is determine if the user of the personal computer was a victim of any online scams. This was not a part of standard forensic procedures about 3 years ago, and now it's definitely suspect number 1. First thing we want to look at is, was it a Trojan, was it an online scam, was she a victim of phishing attacks, farming attacks, etc. That's become part of standard procedures. That's a hard drive. So basically when we started analyzing her hard disk, what we had in mind was just a target date as a clue. We knew about when she had actually lost those credentials, and that was pretty much it. So we started off with that target day and time, and we started looking at her system. Now, for those of you who've ever performed any sort of forensic analysis in a computer system, you know for a fact that the first, I would say, a couple of hours are what we call the gel-in phase. Just try to get an understanding of what's sitting out there on the file system, get a better understanding of the whole system. It's not really looking for specifics at that point. And once you kind of get familiar with what's out there, then you start looking for specifics. This case was a bit of an anomaly, and a good anomaly. What happened was, within the first 5 minutes of that gel-in phase, what we observed was a pretty weird-looking file as by its name. We saw a file there called sdsini.ini, and what we had done at that point was just sorted by the date on which the hack had occurred potentially, which was in May 2004, started going backwards, looking through the file creation times in May and in April. And then we came across this file. Now, I don't know if you guys have heard of a file named like that, but I never saw a file called ini.ini in my life. So obviously that kind of got us thinking, and we wanted to have a closer look at this file. Well, when we had a closer look at this file, what we saw in the file was pretty interesting. Can anyone tell me what that looks like? Well, it's up there. It's a file that contained keystroke logs. What is also interesting, if you see the last line there, that is actually what the lady was typing in on Messenger. I've just gone online and noted that $10,000 has been removed from my, for sake of anonymity, we removed the name of the bank account. So this was the actual keystroke log file, except that I've kind of masked the identity of the victim so that you really don't realize. Now, I had a quick question here. Can anyone tell me what the MC in there stands for? I heard a MasterCard. That was my first answer. Yes, you know, like they say, fools seldom differ. Just kidding. No, it's not actually MasterCard. And I seriously thought that was MasterCard myself to start with, but beg your pardon? Mouse click, fantastic answer, and I think you get a book for that one. I told you it was pretty easy to get things here, right? So you guys need to speak up. So that's actually MC, are the mouse clicks that were being captured as well. We started looking at the file. Now, what we realized was, where did we find this file? This file, it was interesting. It was actually found in the Microsoft System Restore Point. Does anyone know what the Microsoft System Restore Point is?
It restores your system to the certain point of the date by events.
Right, it basically, he's getting greedy to a known state, so it takes a snapshot of your system periodically. And normal forensics procedures, for most forensics examiners, they don't really look at the Microsoft System Restore Points. But we found this weirdly named file, the ini.ini file, sitting in the Microsoft System Restore Points. It was interesting because The reason it got restored in there was because it was named a .ini file, and Windows thought it was a system file which needed to be created a snapshot of, so it backed up the file. Else we wouldn't have actually seen this file, because what we found was, obviously this slide just shows you that if you were to go into your system volume information and double click on it, it's not going to let you do that. It's going to say access denied. But when we created a forensically sound image using a tool like Encase, you can pretty much go to any directory, and this is the exact directory we went to. Now, being named a .ini file, the file was being backed up, and to our surprise, we actually found about 25 instances of this file in the system restore points. So that kind of told us this had been going on for a while. The hackers had been on the system, had got their keystroke log captures going for a while. These 25 files were about 400 pages of keystroke logs in there. And I'll get into a little more details as to how these keystroke logs were being generated. It was a pretty interesting scenario. So going to how the exploit occurred, we were still scratching our heads, trying to figure out what happened. And believe it or not, this is probably the first time in the careers of everyone at my organization that Dr. Watson helped us. Dr. Watson helped us. Can you believe that? What we found in Dr. Watson was an access violation, and for those of you in the Unix world, that's more like a segmentation fault in your world. So we saw an access violation in the Dr. Watson logs. What we also found was that the file was last written to on the 27th of May at about 8:47 a.m., which was around the time frame when the lady observed that her credentials were gone. Of some help for a change. We also, like I said, an access violation is just like a segmentation fault. We looked at the user.dump, which corresponds to the Dr. Watson logs and actually dumps memory at that point. What we found in there was a mail server, a web-based email server was being accessed at the time of this access violation, and that's what the user dump recorded. It was this particular web-based email site. So now we kind of had a clue as to there was some hanky-panky related to this web-based email site. We looked around the system, tried to identify if there were any potential Trojans, could not identify anything. The only clues that we found on the system were the SDS ini.ini files, like I said, about 25 instances of that. So the next step basically for us was to create a VMware session and to actually go to this website to see what got downloaded on our systems. Obviously, we were running tools like Regmon, FileMon, and some other analysis tools. To our surprise, what we found was that the web page itself had been infected. It had an iframe on it of 0 height. Does anyone know what an iframe is? Any web developers, HTML kind of guys here? iframe? Beg your pardon? Yeah, it's an inline frame. So an iframe is an inline frame. What we found was, looking up the source code of the page, it had a 0 height inline frame. What that meant was the inline frame was not going to show up when you actually went to this site. But what it did was, it pointed you to a malicious website where there was this malicious executable sitting that got downloaded on your system. And if your Internet Explorer was vulnerable to that particular vulnerability that it tried to exploit, it would exploit it and do certain bad things, which, again, when we started performing a black box analysis, and the reason we did black box and not a whole analysis, it was AS Packard executable, and given the time constraints imposed on us during this investigation, we thought we'd get the best bang for our buck by performing a black box analysis. We performed a black box analysis. We got a fair understanding of what this executable was doing. It was definitely capturing keystrokes, we knew that, but what it was doing was capturing keystrokes specific to financial institutions only. So if I entered keystrokes and actually Messenger, those were the two things it was going after. I don't know why they were going after Messenger, but they were going after that. So there were targeted keystrokes being logged. It was actually removing its executable components periodically. It was removing anything that it created in the registry in Slack space. But again, in AS Packard, it wasn't of much help to see certain fragments, that too Packard fragments in Slack space. So we thought at this point, maybe we've understood only 10%, but we kind of knew who the culprit was for this attack. It was this website, and this lady did have an email account on this website. So she went to this website, downloaded this executable unknowingly, it executed on her machine, captured keystrokes, and actually what I forgot to mention, it had a built-in SMTP server that periodically sent out her keystroke logs to a mail server outside of the United States. So pretty neat little utility. I wish I could hand it out to you guys to play around with. And just thought, before I move on from this case, just throw some light on what a popular antivirus vendor had to say. A popular antivirus vendor actually classified this as the multi-dropper Trojan. If you look at the risk rating there, it's pretty interesting. It said for end users or corporate users, it's a low risk rating. I don't see how a Trojan that could potentially steal thousands of dollars from someone's account could be a low risk Trojan, but that was what was assigned to it. So the point I was trying to put across with this is antivirus is not a panacea. It's not a cure-all. We have to look beyond antivirus. We have to be more aware of what's going on out there and different ways attackers are using to exploit end users. So actually, before I move on to the next case study, which also talks about end user attacks, but in a very different arena, I thought I'd open this up to a little bit of discussion. Of late, there's been, like I said, a big finger-pointing game, and the banks seem to be saying, we're doing our part. End users say, you cannot expect me to know that stuff. I just thought I'd get an opinion. Who thinks this is the fault of financial institutions? Just raise your hand. One hand goes up there. One more, one more, one more. Seems like a worm. One more. Just 5 people. Who thinks this is the fault of the end user? One hand, 5. So the others think that it's no one's fault. I didn't want to say it, you said it. Yeah, so others are, it's the vendor's fault. And I guess everyone is right in a certain way. It being the vendor's fault, you can do little about it other than not use that particular software. But how do you educate, users like, and I won't be sexist here. A lot of people say, oh, my mom's on the internet, a grandmama, and try to explain to them, hey, you need to download Mozilla, Thunderbird, or something else. It's kind of imagining the magnitude. I think banks definitely need to take the initiative, as they're the ones who understand the threats more than these kind of end users, not you guys, but more my granddad type of end users. They need to kind of point end users to facts about what unpatched browsers can do, how dangerous they can be, things of that nature. There needs to be more awareness coming from their front. And actually, what I've been seeing, at least some of the financial institutions that I've worked with in the United States, they are taking some pretty good measures. For example, E-Trade now hands out RSA Secure ID tokens to anyone who has more than $50,000 in their brokerage account. But that's for free. If you don't have that kind of amount, which a lot of people don't have, including myself, you got to pay $25 for that, which I think is a fair trade-off. If you educate the user, charge them $25 for security, I think it's quite worth it. There's some other two-factor authentication kind of solutions out there. It now hands out RSA Secure ID tokens to anyone who has more than $50,000 in their brokerage account. But that's for free. If you don't have that kind of amount, which a lot of people don't have, including myself, you got to pay $25 for that, which I think is a fair trade-off. If you educate the user, charge them $25 for security, I think it's quite worth it. There's some other two-factor authentication kind of solutions out there which banks are incorporating. Recently also I saw that ING in the US has a need, because then the keystroke log in this case would just be MC, 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 and you really won't have the PIN in there. So I think there are, the role is being played by financial institutions, and also end users need to play their roles. Is there a question? No. Okay. So I'll just move on to the next case so I can keep up to my 58-minute promise. This was another case I dealt with in the recent past, and it was an interesting one. Basically, we walk into an incident pretty much like a doctor in his office when a patient comes in and they just pretty much say, I have a stomach ache. You got to figure out if it's stomach cancer or it's just a minor infection. What we saw here was 20 minutes before the opening bell on a Monday, an investment bank had 172 traders locked out of the network. Basically, they could not log on to the network. Now that means a hell of a lot for investment banks. 172 traders locked out at the time of the opening bell is potentially tens of thousands of dollars for every minute that they cannot trade. The first time it happened, the administrator thought it was coincidence. It was some sort of maintenance procedure that took place on Friday that caused this problem, and pretty much reset manually those 172 accounts. The incident occurred 2 weeks later. At this point, they did realize it's a potential security breach and rightly called in, I guess, incident responders. Being brought into this, I kind of, the first place I start off with is the network, and I said, if you have any network logs, unfortunately in this case, they did have net flow there, so network logs did exist. I started looking at the network logs, and again, all I had in mind was the target date and time as clue. So I sorted those network logs and started looking at the 21st of February 2005 to figure out, did anything suspicious happen? Now, if you look at the yellow line that I have highlighted there, do you see something strange there? SMB traffic. A lot of SMB traffic. If you look at the destination port there, it's 445. And also in speaking to the administrators, we figured out that the 192.168.2.8 was the domain controller. So we see a lot of SMB packets going to the domain controller. Hint, hint. Well, 192.168.2.4 looked like a rogue machine to us. So we said, why not home in on this machine? So we began to home in on the 2.4 machine, just looking at, unfortunately we came into this situation while the attack was still active. So we had a lot of volatile data that we could capture as well. This is not volatile data, but I'll go through that as well. Just basic directory listings showed us that there were some pretty interesting tools there. PSExec, what's PSExec do? Basically allows you to remotely execute commands if you have administrative privileges on a machine. And there's a couple of other NetBIOS hacking related like NBT enum and NetPass, password brute forcing kind of tools on there. You see the timestamp on NBT enum and NetPass, it was around on the 21st of February 05 at 9:11 a.m. And the timestamp on NBT enum and NetPass, it was around on the 21st of February 05 at 9:11 a.m. server. So I started wondering, why is an end user workstation dual homed? It had a wireless connection on it, which had a 10.1 address, and it had its regular 192 address on the wired network. Again, I spoke to the administrator and said, you didn't tell me about your wireless network here. He said, we have none. So I started thinking, there is no wireless network, but there still is a wireless network. The active open connections, again, we saw some NetBIOS connection open to 10.103, which, like you saw in the previous slide, is that particular machine which is actually initiating some sort of weird activity against the domain controller. So there was this machine from 10.105. Now, there was no wireless network. There's a couple of machines on the wireless networks. Things were still a bit fuzzy. We started looking at the active processes, and like I pointed out, we'd found the executable, but we also found an active PSExec service running on the machine when we actually looked at the active processes. So it was kind of becoming a little clear. It seemed like there was a NetBIOS attack which had been successful against this dual-homed machine, which was then being used by as a base by the attacker to actually go after the domain controller. But how did the attacker get to this machine? Well, we looked at the wireless network configuration on this machine, and that seemed like the culprit there. Can anyone tell me what the problem is there? Did I hear something? Yeah, it pretty much says connect to any wireless network, and when that's said that way, it basically says the wireless network with the highest strength, that's the one you want to connect to, the one with the highest signal strength. Not the best setting, definitely not a recommended setting, but that's how this machine was configured. So now it seemed like this machine was connecting to some sort of a rogue wireless network out there, which had a pretty high strength, because otherwise it won't connect to it. It was connecting to that, and potentially some other machine on that wireless network was routing to this. Pretty interesting, the first time I saw an attack of that nature. So our next goal was to locate this rogue access point. Now again, it's pretty easy to locate a rogue access point if you're somewhere in the middle of Colorado or Maine or someplace like that in the US or in farm country. But when you come to New York City, where you have 50-story buildings and within 10-meter distance of each other, where do you start? And literally, this was the financial district. So we had all the big banks literally sharing walls there, and 4 of them, and we had to find a rogue access point somewhere in these 200 floors. So it did take a bit of time, but guess what? We were pretty determined. So we pretty much nailed it. We got it. What happened? So there was a victim and there was an attacker. Everyone knew that. No rocket science there. That wall there is not a firewall. It's a physical wall. I couldn't get a better picture for that one. So what we thought was happening was this guy put up a rogue access point of sorts. The victim, because of the misconfiguration, started talking to this access point because it's a pretty high signal. Like I said, they were sharing a wall, literally. The attacker obviously got notified of that because that was his access point, associated with the access point, and started going after the victim. Now the victim, unfortunately, was configured with a blank local admin password. So that obviously made life a lot simpler for this attacker. He pretty much guessed the local administrative password, got on the machine, mapped a NetBIOS share, dumped his tools on there, and then basically started going after NetBIOS logins against the domain controller, and that was the bunch of packets we were actually seeing. But this attacker was not as smart as you guys are, and what he did was, he didn't actually look at, enumerate the account lockout policy. So he didn't enumerate the account, I said that. He didn't enumerate the account lockout policy, third time. To understand that basically accounts got locked out after 5 invalid attempts. So he just went crazy after each one of these accounts, which he had enumerated via NetBIOS, and kept going after them, trying thousands of passwords, unknowingly locking out every one of those accounts, which were the traders. He was hitting the domain on which the traders' accounts were configured. 172 traders gone, just locked out of their accounts. So a simple misconfiguration on one of the machines at an organization had such a point to go after end users. He figured it's easier to do that than try to breach the physical security of that organization, especially in New York City, going through those cattle herders and I guess all kinds of metal detectors to get up there and go after servers. It was a lot easier sitting where he was to go after the end user and then hack the domain controller. So, what would be nirvana? Well, I guess what would be nirvana is if organizations started bearing the onus of user awareness like I discussed. So if financial institutions, for example, or any organization for that matter, started doing a lot more security awareness training, started telling their staff a lot more about what they need to look out for, what they need to do, what they don't need to do from a security standpoint, how they need to patch their systems or have them patched for them. Incorporate procedural measures. Going back to the lady who lost $50,000, what kind of shocked me was the first time she lost $20,000, the bank was notified of that, but she still lost another $20,000. I don't care what the technical controls are. I don't care if her system's unpatched, but at that time, her bank account should have been frozen. There were no procedural controls. And that was not acceptable. So I think there the bank was at fault. Now, when I talk about this case in the US again, I often get asked, but what about regulations? For example, California SB 1386 requires the bank, if it has branches in California, to actually come out and say customer data has been compromised, or GLIBA or any of those financial related regulatory bodies have created these regulations. Guess what? Unfortunately for this lady, this bank was, like they say, in the Caribbean, man. So they were not under any of those regulations. No procedural controls. They were pointing the finger back at this poor lady who had no clue about how to patch systems and what needs to be done to prevent Trojans from getting on your machine. When I spoke to her, she said, well, I got antivirus running on there. Well, you saw what the antivirus guy said. This is no risk to you. It's just $50,000, no big deal. Also, organizations, often I get into debates with administrators who say there's no need to block outbound traffic. They're like, because that's our users going outbound. Well, fortunately, I don't know if you heard the name, but Richard Baitlick, a big guy who's pretty big time into IDSs, IPSs, and network monitoring, is coming up with a book later this fall, which is called Extrusion Detection. The whole damn book is based on how to block outbound connections. So hopefully that gets through the thick skin of those administrators and they start looking into blocking outbound connections randomly. As far as end users are concerned, obviously, if they're aware of the threats, they do a lot better being secure. If they keep their systems patched, I know sometimes it's kind of ridiculous even to expect that of users. But importantly, don't browse the internet as administrator, because that kind of solves a few of the issues. From Tony's talk yesterday, Tony Shore, that is, it seemed like they're implementing some sort of privilege restriction in IE7, which is definitely, I think, something that had been required for a while. So they're basically taking care of that for you in IE7. So, if all that's not enough, then let's add one more thing, and all that, and I'll be a retired millionaire in the Bahamas. Yeah, that'd be cool too. So that was pretty much all I had. I'd be happy to take any questions that you guys have. I know you guys want to get to the iPod raffle, but questions? Who said that? Does that look like me? Damn. Shit.
Regarding that rogue access point.
Oh, okay, not the photo, the rogue access point. Yeah, okay. Rogue access point.
If that bank is not having a wireless network,
right,
then what your forensics did he physically hack into a computer to plug in a Wi-Fi card?
His laptop was pretty much like my laptop, which had inbuilt wireless onto it, which was enabled by default.
I thought it was a desktop.
More importantly, it was a traveling laptop, so it made it even more fun. If it picked up a virus at home, it came to the bank. I guess like they say, Salamat Tinggal, if I got that right.